Oh, 1, 2.
Evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming out on this frosty Wednesday for this Blur marathon.
It's the Blur extravaganza of all extravaganzas. Yeah.
Is there a better pun in there? Blurathon is the best I can do.
Blurathon. That's as good as we're going to get, yeah.
But yes, so you're going to see two cracking films, the documentary To the End, followed by live at Wembley Stadium, both directed by the man to my left, Mr. Toby L.
Woo! Thank you very much. Hello guys, lovely to see you.
So Toby, tell us a little about yourself. So, founder of Transgressive Records, don't you know? Pretty big deal. And then, but you have sort of forayed into film a few times. You made the amazing Rip Up the Road by Foles. If you haven't seen it, you should. So tell us about your kind of dalliances with films before this.
Well, like I basically with my friend Tim, I started the label in 2004. But alongside that time, I was making sort of like kind of my own sort of TV programs at the time in my head more than anything. But then eventually MTV saw them. I was doing like an internship at XFM, which is now called Radio X, which is just around the corner actually in Leicester Square here. And Zane Lowe was there, and when I was 16, you know, as I was leaving after 2 weeks, he said to me, if you ever do anything in like media or anything, let me know. And 2 years later, I'd gone to New York with money I'd saved up from a club night I was doing, and I basically made a pilot in New York at the age of 18, like just literally sofa surfing on someone that I didn't even know's couch in Brooklyn. And I basically went out and just sort of filmed these interviews with artists and started kind of making, I guess, the sort of early steps towards the style of filmmaking, like this quite fly-on-the-wall raw documentary thing. Anyway, so I then tapped up Zane Lowe 2 years later, and he was like, "Who are you again?" And I was like, "Oh, the intern." Like, "Oh, yeah, best intern in the world ever." Yeah, and he was like, "Yeah, I did say I'd look at something." Shit. And then anyway, he very kindly had a look at this pilot, and he said, He was like, "You should play it to the channel manager of MTV." Will McGillivray, and then I played it to Will the following week in Camden. He turned up really grouchy, like, who is this kid who Zane's foisted upon me this time? And he watched my little New York pilot and then said £6,000 for 6 episodes. And I was like, at that time, given that the pilot cost £250, which was just my flight to New York, I was like, oh, I'm rich. Obviously, being an 18-year-old and 19-year-old at the time, I didn't quite realise that that was absolute extortion from a conglomerate side of a child, but it was the stepping stone I needed to kind of make a program, and thankfully that show, which was called Rock Feedback, ran for 6 series on MTV and Channel 4, and that led to me eventually meeting Josh, who's a producer who's in this room, who made the films with me. And
that
then
was you?
What's that?
I literally didn't know that was you. I'm just remembering Rock Feedback. Sorry, I'm just reacting in real time.
Oh, right. Yeah, well, I started as a music writer and then turned Rock Feedback into a TV program and then a club night, and then that was the origins of filmmaking. So all of that happened in parallel to then starting the label Transgressive. So it's always kind of been there alongside the label, but I think initially, at least, most people knew me for the label work, but since we've been doing more film projects, there's now like more of this coming to the fore.
And so through Transgressive, you've worked with someone called Damon Albarn and someone called Graham Coxon, working on their own records. At what point did you become aware that the the second coming, the Ballad of Darren was on the way, and that you needed to be?
I got tipped off. I think it might have been by Damon. I was in his studio. We were talking about another project linked to Transgressive at the time, and then he brought up, in a kind of sort of excited way, like, you know, we're doing Wembley, and I was like, I'd heard like within, but I was like, oh yeah, I heard about that, and I think we then went on this car journey, and I kind of like sort of we were talking about other things, and I was like, you know, the Wembley thing. He was like, yeah. I was like, I'd love to sort of throw my hat in the ring, you know, I make these films and stuff, and I'd already filmed with him before for the label, and he was, yeah, I'd like that too. And then we didn't really talk about it for a long time, and then thankfully when the band meeting came up to talk about it, I think Damon was on board, I think Graham was on board because I'd worked with him, but I'd never met Alex and Dave before, and I think for them it was like, okay, so you know half the band, but you haven't met us, and there was an element of, they're a complete pure democracy, so it was making sure that everyone felt good about going ahead and making films. So thankfully I eventually passed the test after some rigorous questions.
Such as?
Yeah.
good questions, like should we make another film as a band, and what would the story be? And my response to that was, yes, this is your biggest pair of shows ever. It would be mad to not document them in some capacity, even if it only is a concert film. But then secondarily, the story I feel you've been on since, prior documentaries is that, it's been that much time, you've all evolved and got older as people. I think people will be curious to catch up with where you're at in life and maybe reflect on your perspective in life right now. And then I think Alex goes, you're right, it is a fucking great story. And I think in essence they were correctly testing to see if I had a vision for how the portrayal of them could be in 2023, 2024. And in that sense, it was more an emotional story of friendship and brotherhood than it was, let's retell the Blur story. Because I think whether you've got Wikipedia or indeed the brilliant No Distance Left to Run film, you've got all of that story told. So for me, it was more about shedding more emotional light on where they're at, really.
Who's seen the film? Hands up.
How many times?
Oh wow! I'm delighted that there's return people, but I'm also excited that there are people that haven't seen it, because it's great that this film's obviously been out for a minute, so I'm really pleased that some people seen it for the first time.
Just don't want to give away too many spoilers, but
good point. They did play Wembley though. just to be clear, just in case you're wondering.
I'll save the Coke can story. But you'll see. But I mean, what can you tell us about kind of the mood in the camp, mood in the room when you realised that Damon was going to be so open and honest about kind of coming back from his relationship problems and needing his band and this album to kind of make sense of life?
Well, I mean, I think it's addressed in the film, like, what everyone's going through in their lives at the time, but hopefully in a kind of tasteful and respectful way. The last thing I wanted to do was make anything tabloidy or exploitative. So for me it was like, and for them as well, it was really honest that the capture of the film was as honest documentary as possible, that it wasn't conceited and it wasn't contrived, and we wanted all conversations to be naturalistic. We didn't want it to be like loads of glossy talking heads. One thing I've been saying whilst doing the kind of promo rounds for the project is, I do think a lot of documentaries these days are really sanitized and artificial, and we wanted to go the complete opposite direction, which for some people's tastes and sensibilities might feel a bit more loose and raw, and maybe it's a bit like, I don't know, not as set up as other things, but that's intentional. I want people to feel like they're in the moment with the band at every stage of what they're experiencing.
And in that sense, it must have been a dream to edit, because like the moments of the comedy was hot in the right place.
Well, that was another thing. Like, I think we were honest about the fact that, with the band, that we wanted it to be emotional and raw, and there was going to be this beautiful element to it. However, that said, they themselves have felt maybe historically the humour of the band hasn't been fully conveyed. And as someone that has known them well as initially and presently a fan, but then also has worked with a couple of them, I know firsthand how hilarious and wry and ironic they can be. And so I really wanted to kind of put that across. So I hope that people find it as funny as it was to be in the room when those moments happened.
We're now going to try and cram in as many cues in the Q&A as we can. Hands up who's got a question. Down here, second row.
Hi. Does it work? Yeah. While we're talking about editing, my question ties right into this, because I was wondering how much, I think you said at some point in some interview that there's loads more material and you could make another 2 films out of this or something. And I was wondering how much the band was involved in actually deciding what got into the film and what didn't.
Really good question. Yeah, there's so much footage, because we filmed a lot of it over 6 months, so there's just a lot of material. And the challenge when you're going through the edit is you could get distracted by lots of like pathways. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's interesting. But you have to eventually find yourself back to the main road, as it were. They weren't that involved at all with the edit. I think that had they been, it might have dampened the credibility of it. I think, this isn't label funded, it's not like funded by the band, it's an independent production from an independent production company, and we wanted it to be as honest a reflection as possible. And the moment you start interfering with that, you can start accidentally or intentionally tampering with the credibility of what you're making. So I wanted it to be as authentic and independent as possible, which meant that when in January of this year, when I first showed the rough cut, to each of them in all of their houses by themselves, it was absolutely terrifying. Because, as I said earlier, it is an honest depiction of what happened, and it's very naturalistic. So there was an element of fear that came into that, you know, to show people being that honest and candid and vulnerable at times. So I commend them for going on that journey in the first place, but secondarily watching the film and accepting and endorsing the form it took.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Anyone? At the back?
Given concert films pretty much haven't changed since the Talking Heads and very few jump outside that box, how did you go about capturing the concert differently? And was there anything that you maybe wanted to do but weren't able to do?
Good question. I mean, one of the reviews that we had for the concert film, which I found hilarious, is like, this isn't Stop Making Sense. The reason that's brilliant as a comment is, yes, it's definitely not. It wasn't shot of the Talking Heads over 3 days in a theatre set up for camera. We're capturing a gig that was happening in a stadium. So I would agree with that journalist that it's the opposite of Stop Making Sense in that regard. But Stop Making Sense is one of my all-time favourite pieces of cinema. You know, it's undeniably brilliant. But for me, the challenge was, how do you make Wembley Stadium feel like a club? Like, how, you know, hopefully what you guys watch later, and I'm going to politely ask the cinema to crank it. It's like, how does this version of the band make you feel? At times the edit is relentless and a bit unorthodox and a bit too fast. Again, it's intentional. When you're at a show that's really combustible and larger than life, you get taken and transported, at least I am, on a journey where it's more emotive than it is actual, and it's not about the technicality. So for me, what's more important than loads of, like, even though we have lots of these beautiful shots, rather than just like the same stock footage you see at Wembley Stadium, I want people to feel like I'm in the audience, I'm singing along, you're seeing those little bits of like the tears in the band members' eyes and the arms around each other. It's about devotion, it's about camaraderie, and it's about the explosion of live music. So for me, it's more about, how do we make Wembley Stadium feel like a character in and of itself, but also make it irrelevant at the same time, because it's just about the songs and the emotion of the situation. There's 3,000 shots, 20 cameras, you know, we poured over every detail to try and make sure that each song has its sense of flow and momentum. So hopefully that comes across.
Wasn't Jurassic Park though, was it?
That's just as valid a comment as that. I mean, frankly, yeah.
It's better be about dinosaurs, wasn't that? Favourite dinosaur?
It really pissed me off, that comment. I'm not surprised. I mean, it's just like the most laziest, like, oh my god, saying about a film that this isn't. Anyway, sorry. I need to get some therapy on
I'd
that.
like to ask, why is the title To the End, which I hope is not the end of Blur? And the second is, what's the most surprising event or things about Blur members that you get from this film? And who's Damon angry about in the movie? Is it Alex making mistakes or what?
Okay. So part one, To the End. It was called To the End because it felt thematically close to the emotion of the film. It's about, you know, it's the end of a chapter, obviously. It's kind of like the end of this big journey for them, coming to their biggest ever shows ever. It's like another crossroads for them as members. It just felt like there's a sense of conclusion to this part of the band. Personally and emotionally, it's the end of other elements and chapters in their lives. It also feels like a very optimistic thing, to the end, almost like a kind of, you know, like to infinity and beyond type scenario. But equally as well, not that anyone can control it. If it were the end, then it would be a wonderful place. You know, it just felt like it summarised a lot of the emotion. And also, one of the themes in the film is mortality, which is the ultimate end. And you know, we use the sea as a bit of a metaphor, as the ultimate end of the earth as well. So the end is this kind of recurrent, subtle thing, and we even just do a visual cue on the title of the end at the end of the film. So it's just it's something to obsess over. What's your second question, please?
The most surprising thing you get from this film?
Have you seen it? Have you?
Yeah.
Okay, well, for me, the most surprising thing that happens is actually in the first sort of 15, 20 minutes when the band are in Devon, and it happened on the first day of shooting. I kind of don't want to give it away too much, but there were just elements of vulnerability that I wasn't expecting going into the studio with the band, and the element of honesty and openness that they were feeling. So that comes up quite quickly. So that was a big surprise being in the room when that moment happened. And your last question, please.
In the movie, there's a scene where Damon is very angry.
Where Damon's angry. I'm going to leave that ambiguous. Sometimes it's good not to have answers.
Was it you?
Probably was. Fucking camera out my face.
Over time. Couple more?
Yeah, you still got time, yes.
Okay, great. Any more? Oh, down the front.
Okay, I don't know if that can be spoken about, but I remember at the beginning Netflix was on board for the production. At least this is what we were told, and then they just sort of like withdrew from it. And at some point, it was thought that everything was kind of jeopardized because they had like some rights about that or something like that. So I heard about that from a kind of direct source, so I just wanted to know if there's something that we can know about that, or...
It's a good business question. I can honestly say, with Josh, the producer here, like, we didn't have any agreement with Netflix. They were never slated to do it. They came to the premiere and loved it, though, which is really nice. When we had the film premiere, we invited all the streaming platforms just as people that we know and wanted to see it on the big screen, and the feedback we got from them was amazing. But we've actually sold it somewhere else, which is going to be announced in the next couple of weeks, which is a big UK platform. So I can't say anything more, but it's going to be on Ian trying to get his bloody exclusive, filming every moment. No, I'm not allowed to say anything, and I don't know when it's being announced. But Netflix are fans of the film, which I don't think they'd mind me saying. They were very gracious and sent some lovely messages after watching it. But I can discard that rumour. It's not true.
Cancel the extension on your house when you get the Netflix dollar.
yeah, exactly.
Any more questions from the audience? Oh, there we go.
It's a simple one. What's next? Have you got any projects lined up? What's in the pipeline?
Your life story, my friend. We're actually, Josh, the producer over there in the darkness, he and I are like kind of working through a lot of sort of development ideas at the moment. What's been really flattering is a lot of people have got in touch with us after the film came out, and all over the world, people that have written books saying, would you like to adapt the book? And other artists saying they'd be interested in doing things. So we're just sort of going through it all. But truthfully, because we spent 18 months, you know, from the beginning of treatment through to then producing, to then editing and then promoting, we're kind of allowing the universe, as I gaze into these fake stars, to sort of like kind of show the path, but enjoying not having it mapped out just yet. But there will be some stuff next year. We've got some really exciting things. Sorry, that's a bit evasive.
Oasis?
Oasis. I've been Oasis a lot. I mean, obviously, it would be weird and amazing to do. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, we'll see. I mean, they said the revolution will not be televised, so we'll.
Oh
have
yeah,
to
but
see
does
when-
Netflix count as telly?
It's a good question, actually. Yeah. It won't be televised, but it will be streamed.
Time for a couple more? Cool, how are we looking? Anyone for any more? Or I shall answer. Ooh.
You can dive in.
So it's not a spoiler because it was in the news. When when Dave broke his leg,
Yes.
how did the jeopardy feel among the two?
I felt really guilty because I got a call from management going, you should know, this was like the week before Wembley. Dave's, pretty much broken his leg. His knee is not really, we don't know what's going to happen. And the one side of me was literally like, oh man, that's really awful for Dave. Then I guess the evil filmmaker part of me was like, ooh, it's quite a good story, isn't it? So the first thing we did was we got in a car and went straight to his house in Surrey and spoke to him about it. And we saw him before he'd really spoken to the other band members. So for me, the thing I love about the scene is that you kind of see their reactions, like each of the band members talking about and speculating what's happened to Dave. And like we had seen him first, so we were able to update them. And there's a bit of humour in it. But there was a genuine fear. Like they had to cancel a gig in France and stuff. Like would he be able to play the gigs? But very conveniently, like he couldn't. What was the thing? He couldn't do that. He couldn't make his leg flat. However, wonderfully, he could sort of bend his knee and play the drums, but anything like that was agony. So when he was walking, it was agony, and he was like on crutches, and it was horrendous. But somehow, majestically, this injury was like the perfect drummer injury. So it was very fortuitous, because I think a lot of fear obviously happened when that moment happened, and so. There's minor jeopardy in the film covering that, but equally we didn't want to amp it up too much, because again, everyone knew the gigs did happen, so it would have been a bit disingenuous,
Well, I mean, every band member has their arc. I mean, how would you, we've talked about Damon, we've talked about Dave. What would you say that Alex's arc was?
I think Alex is one of the. Well, I think they're all interesting to me. Obviously, I'm very sort of close to it, but I think Alex's arc is wonderfully reflective. So a lot of people have said to me, they've come out of it and said, I didn't expect Alex's story to be the most affecting to them. There's a scene sort of about 2/3 in Primavera in Barcelona, which is the first big gig before they play Wembley, effectively, and he just gets very reflective about being back on the road and maybe some old demons returning and the challenges of that and reconciling it. And also embracing it, because being in a band is really exciting and it comes with a lot of magic, but there's also a lot of baggage, and he's very open about that. And I think there's a real sense of humility and vulnerability the way he expresses that. So, and he also touches on some really other key themes in the film, which is just about male friendship as you get older and how bad, typically men are at talking. And I'm sure some people are aware here, tragically, men typically of middle age, it's the highest killer is suicide, and although the film obviously doesn't go to that depth, etc., it alludes to the challenges that men of a certain age getting older maybe don't open up as much as they need to. And I think there's been some great social progress the last 20 years, more to be done in terms of destroying this horrendous patriarchy that we've lived in for way too long. That said, I think we need to ensure every traveller in the world is all right and safe and well, no matter what gender or person they were born as. We need to make sure everyone's okay. So I think it's really interesting hearing someone that's about to headline a stadium talking about things in that manner.
And this is also the subject of Alex's book coming out soon, right?
Yeah, I think it's coming out soon, yeah.
Yeah, have you spoken to him about that? Because obviously there's a lot of crossover here.
No, I haven't actually. I really can't wait to read it though. I'm curious to see what his perspective on everything is and how much of it relates to how the documentary comes across.
Don't watch that shit.
Yeah. That'll be really interesting. I mean, if I was to choose maybe one of my favourite playbacks, it was probably watching it not just with Alex but his wife and one of their kids, and we just watched it in their living room, and like they were just howling with laughter.
Oh, wow.
It was so wonderful, and it was a really fun playback.
Good cheese selection?
He didn't give me any fucking cheese.
What?
He did make a lovely lunch though, and it was really good, and it was all fresh from his farm, so I'll give him that, but no cheese.
And finally, touched upon earlier, to the end, I spoke to Graham about this a couple of months ago, and he said he doesn't think it's to the end, and they're getting on a bit, so they should probably do something soon while they can still move their knees. I mean, having been on the inside, what's your opinion on the future of Blur?
I don't think you can predict it. It is like this genuinely wonderful thing where all four of them have to really want to do it, and it's a true thing. Like, it's a total democracy, as I said earlier, and all four of them need to feel the momentum of it, and weirdly it needs to subside and ebb away in order for it to then feel special when it comes back. I think the reason people care so much is not just the amazing music and incredible shows, it's that it feels transient. You don't know how long it's going to last for. But if you are a fan of the band, unlike certain other bands, there's the glory of following what all four of them are up to. It's quite mad what all four of them do, spanning law, politics, other amazing musical projects, films, cheese, farms. It's wild, really. It would be an incredible docu-series, that could roll multiple seasons, really, if you just followed the four of them, I think.
Next year.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I've been Andrew Trenno. Okay, please give it up for the amazing director, Toby L.